If you're hearing this, it probably means one of two things. Either you really, truly love history, or you're just trying to fall asleep. In both cases, you're in the right place, because tonight we'll be taking a long, slow walk through the dust, stone, and olive-scented air of the ancient Roman world. This won't be a tale of swords and glory. No, not the kind where emperors scream on battlefields. Tonight, we leave the war drums behind. Instead, we'll listen to the soft trickle of water in Roman fountains. We'll wander down straight stone roads with sandals that make no sound. We'll sit in silent marble forums while senators argue very slowly about laws no one remembers, and we'll fall asleep somewhere in between one boring consul and the next. You see, Rome wasn't built in a day, but it might help you fall asleep in one. So get comfortable, fluff your pillow like a Roman legionnaire setting camp, breathe, let go, and drift with me back in time. Let's begin. In the beginning, not the beginning of time, but the beginning of a very specific story. There were hills, quiet, lonely hills, rolling, uneven, and mostly unnoticed by the world. These hills weren't special. They weren't particularly tall. But one of them, just one, would one day host the greatest empire the Western world would ever yawn its way through. That hill was Palatine. And like all boring stories that grow into legends, this one begins not with swords or conquests, but with two babies left alone by a river, floating, sleeping, Romulus and Remus. Their names sound important now, as if they were born to make history. But at that moment, they were just two tiny infants drifting on the lazy curve of the River Tiber, swaddled in silence and a little bit of mud. Legend tells us they were the sons of a Vestal virgin and the god Mars. But we don't need gods in this story. We just need something warm and furry, a she-wolf, soft-coated, patient-eyed, slow-moving. She didn't roar. She didn't fight lions. She simply found the boys and licked their cheeks. She nursed them in a cave, the Lupercal, beneath the hill that would someday bear the weight of marble palaces and forgotten laws. And if you listen closely, even now, perhaps under the right stars, you can hear the quiet suckling of two infants and the breath of a wolf echoing through stone. But myths grow up, and so did the boys. As Romulus and Remus aged, they argued, as all brothers do, first over food, then over games, and finally over cities. They wanted to build something permanent. But like all big ideas, they disagreed on where to put it. Romulus preferred the Palatine Hill. Remus, he liked Aventine lower, broader, a bit more spacious. But empires rarely start with compromise. They begin, more often than not, with quiet stubbornness. So Romulus, frustrated and firm, started building his city anyway. He dug a trench, he drew sacred lines in the dirt, and he declared the ground holy. Remus, amused or annoyed, the story shifts, jumped over the line. It was a taunt, a challenge, a mistake. Romulus, with whatever passed for a sword in those sleepy pre-Roman days, killed his brother. Not with rage, not with flair, just inevitability. And so, from that moment on, as the slow sun drifted west and shadows crawled across the gentle hill, the city of Rome belonged to Romulus. Alone he gave it his name, Rome, and then, like a man, late for dinner, he started organizing. He built walls, not tall, not thick, but enough to say, "This is mine." He opened the gates to anyone with nowhere else to go. Fugitives, wanderers, debtors, dreamers. Rome became a collection of strays, a city of outcasts, whisperers, men who looked over their shoulders too often, and Romulus, ever the quiet builder, gave them structure. He created the Senate. Just 100 men at first, all called paters or fathers. They weren't wise or powerful. They were just available. He called the people Romans, and himself their king. A shepherd king, if you like, guiding a flock that didn't always know where it was going. But even in silence, life finds rhythm. The city began to grow. Streets twisted themselves through the valley. Wooden huts leaned into each other, and smoke, thin and soft, rose into a sky too lazy to storm. Still, there was a problem, a dull one, but pressing. Rome had too few women, so Romulus, practicable. As always, through a festival, he invited the neighboring Sabines, a peaceful tribe with daughters. They came, they drank, and during the celebration, as music floated in slow circles and torches flickered, the Roman men took the women. It wasn't a love story. It wasn't loud, but it worked. The Sabine women, over time, accepted their new roles, and Rome kept growing. By the end of Romulus's reign, whether he vanished in a storm or simply wandered into memory, Rome had changed, from a trench in the dirt to a town with laws, legends, and lazy dreams. But Rome wasn't an empire yet. It wasn't even a country. It was just a beginning. And if you're still awake, we're just getting started. After Romulus disappeared, whether lifted into the clouds by the gods or quietly buried under fig trees, Rome did not crumble. It hesitated, it blinked, and then it chose a new king. His name was Numa Pompilius. He didn't come from Rome. He came from the outside, from a place with hills that were even quieter than Rome's. And unlike Romulus, Numa had no interest in conquest. He preferred temples and calendars and rituals. Where Romulus swung a sword, Numa lit incense. He spoke to gods that others had forgotten. He added January and February to the Roman calendar, not because he wanted more months, but because things felt incomplete without them. He appointed priests, like the Pontifex Maximus, and created ceremonies for things most people didn't understand. And Rome, under Numa, became patient. There were no wars, no invasions, just quiet structure. He ruled for 40 years, and when he died, Rome wept gently, like a town losing its grandfather. The third king was Tullus Hostilius. His name sounded hostile, and he lived up to it. A little, unlike Numa, Tullus wanted action. But Rome was still young. There weren't many enemies to fight. So he looked around and picked a neighbor, Alba Longa, and challenged them to a war. But instead of marching entire armies, they agreed to a shortcut. Each side picked 3 brothers, a duel, 3 versus 3. The Horatia for Rome, the Curati for Alba Longa. They fought on a dusty field, and one by one they fell, until only one Horatius remained, wounded, limping, but victorious. Tullus Hostilius was pleased. Rome had won. Something so he built more buildings, added a few columns. Then, perhaps tired, he vanished. Some say he angered the gods. Others say lightning struck his house. Whatever the reason, he was gone. Next came Ancus Marcius, the 4th king. A grandson of Numa, they say. He wanted balance, some war, some peace. He built the first bridge across the river Tiber, the Pons Sublicius. Made of wood, without nails. It creaked, but it worked. People could finally cross. Rome began to stretch, like a cat waking up from a nap. Ancus also founded a port Ostia, a sleepy town by the sea, where salted fish dried under the sun. Under him, Rome tasted expansion. But still, quietly, the fifth king, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. He wasn't Roman by birth. He came from Etruria, to the north, a land of artisans and soothsayers. Tarquinius brought something new to Rome style. He built the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, not glamorous, but important. He expanded the Forum, started the construction of the Circus Maximus, where horses would one day run in slow eternal loops, and then, like many kings, he died. Rumor says he was assassinated by the sons of Ancus Marcius, but Rome didn't flinch. The sixth king was Servius Tullius, born of no known father. Some say he was the son of a slave. Others whisper he had divine fire in his hair when he was a child. Servius was a reformer. He created the census, organizing people by wealth, not just blood. He divided Rome into classes, not because he liked labels, but because it helped when deciding who paid for shields and sandals. He built the Servian Wall, a sleepy line of stones that wrapped gently around the city, and most importantly, he introduced the Comitia Centuriata, an assembly, where people could vote, slowly, in order. By class, it was bureaucracy. Beautiful, slow-moving bureaucracy. Servius ruled for a long time. And when he grew old, another figure emerged from the shadows. The seventh and final king, Lucius Tarquinius. Superbus, his name meant the proud. And he lived up to it. He was not kind, not gentle, and not quiet. He ruled without consulting the Senate. He executed rivals. He ignored old traditions. He was loud where the others had been muted, and the people grew tired one day. After a scandal too disturbing for bedtime stories, the Romans said enough. They overthrew the king, not with swords, but with silence. They declared, no more kings, and in place of monarchy, they invented something new. Something confusing, complex, and destined to cause many, many arguments. The Roman Republic. And so, from Romulus to Superbus, 7 kings ruled, each one adding a brick, a law, a temple, or a trench, each one fading into stone, smoke, and memory. Rome, now, was no longer a village. It was an idea, a stubborn, sprawling, sleep-inducing idea, ready to govern itself, or at least pretend to. With the fall of its 7th king, Rome entered a new chapter, not an empire, not yet, but something in between, a halfway house of laws and traditions, and meetings that went on far too long. They called it a republic, and from the very beginning it was complicated. At the top were the consuls, 2 of them, always 2, because Rome had learned, painfully, that one man with a crown was one man too many. These consuls shared power, but sharing is never easy. One could veto the other, and often did each served for only 1 year, then stepped down unless they were begged to return, or unless Rome forgot they ever existed. Behind them was the Senate, a council of old men. Their togas were white, but their decisions were often grey. They debated. Then they debated more. Then they tabled the debate for another day. Some of them had once been consuls. Some were just rich. But all of them loved the sound of their own cautious voices. They didn't pass laws, not directly, but they advised. Endlessly below the Senate were the assemblies, groups of citizens who voted. There were different types. The Centuriate Assembly, which gave more weight to the wealthy, the tribal assembly, which pretended to be equal, and later, the plebeian council, which tried to fight back. Rome loved balance. It loved checks, and it loved counterbalances. It created layers of rules so thick, no one could act too quickly. It was genius, and maddening, and very, very boring, which made it perfect for sleep. But politics was not Rome's only obsession. There were officers, so many officers. There were praetors, who handled justice slowly, quaestors, who counted coins and double-checked scrolls, aediles, who managed grain and street lamps, censors, who judged character and conducted the census. And if things got truly dire, Rome could appoint a dictator, but only for 6 months. 6 months, no more, because trust was thin, and ambition was thick. The citizens, or at least the male, landowning ones, were divided into classes. At the top, the patricians, noble families, proud and pale. They claimed descent from the first 100 senators, or perhaps from dustier myths. But below them, the plebeians, everyone else, farmers, soldiers, bread bakers, and roof fixers. People with names no one carved in marble. For years, the patricians ruled everything, but the plebeians were many and patient. They began to demand more, not loudly, but steadily. This led to the conflict of the orders, a very slow revolution. The plebeians walked out. Literally, they left the city, sat on a hill, and refused to return. No riots, just absence. And Rome, afraid of silence, made concessions, bit by bit. Plebeians gained the right to elect their own tribunes, the right to marry patricians, the right to hold office, and finally, the right to be consul. The Republic, once exclusive, became slightly less so, not equal, not fair, but better, and slowly, Rome began to function. The city paved more roads, built aqueducts that whispered water from faraway hills, raised columns that watched shadows grow, and organized its legions, lines of men in sandals marching, to the beat of nothing at all. There were wars, yes, but even the wars were methodical, drawn out, agreed upon, stretched over years and treaties and stony glances across borders. And yet, in this calm, cracks formed. Ambitious men rose, men who didn't like waiting, men who made speeches that actually stirred crowds. The Republic, for all its clever checks, could not check everything. But that, dear listener, is a problem for later. For now, as the sun sets on Rome's earliest democracy, you may begin to feel the weight of the centuries. Heavy, soft, persistent, like history, like sleep. By the 2nd century before Christ, the Roman Republic had grown very large, too large. Some whispered, too many provinces, too many taxes, too many people pretending to agree. From Spain to Greece, from Gaul to North Africa, the map stretched like an old tunic worn too thin, and within Rome, the Senate still debated, the assemblies still voted, the consuls still came and went, but something had changed. The system that once kept ambition in check now gave it pathways. The first warning came in the form of Tiberius Gracchus, a tribune, soft-spoken but determined. He proposed a law to give land to the poor, not a radical idea, just inconvenient. The Senate, offended, did what it often did, nothing. But when Tiberius pushed harder, he was beaten to death, in public, with wooden chairs. No trial, no defense. Rome had killed one of its own officials, not with ceremony, but with furniture. It would not be the last time. Soon came Gaius Gracchus, Tiberius's younger brother. He tried again. Wider reforms, more rights, cheaper grain. He too was stopped violently, and the city learned a quiet lesson. Ideas were dangerous, especially when they worked. Then came Gaius Marius, a soldier, not noble, not ancient, just competent. He reformed the Roman army, allowed landless men to serve, promised them land in return. His soldiers were loyal, not to Rome, but to him. For the first time, a Roman general had an army that saluted the man, not the Senate. The balance wobbled. Then came Lucius Cornelius, Sulla, sharp, clever, cold. When denied a military command, he marched on Rome itself with legions. Through the gates, quietly, no dramatic music, no thunder, just sandaled feet and fear. He took power, named himself dictator, not for 6 months, but indefinitely. He rewrote laws, executed enemies, posted names on walls, prescription lists, where one could read, in silence, who would die next. And then he retired. Voluntarily, he held too much power. He used it. And then he stepped away into his garden. Rome. Exhaled, but not for long. Another man was rising, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. Pompey the Great, young, popular, decorated in foreign wars. He wanted recognition, so he paraded elephants through Rome, staged games, wore cloaks with too much gold. He wasn't loud, but his ambition glittered. And while Pompey basked, another figure emerged, a man with debts, with charm, with quiet ambition wrapped in smiles. Julius Caesar. Caesar rose through the ranks with the patience of a scribe and the precision of a sculptor. He gave speeches, slow, persuasive. He made alliances with Pompey and with Crassus, a man of gold. The first triumvirate was born, an unofficial agreement. 3 men, 1 goal, personal power. Rome watched and waited. Caesar left for Gaul and stayed. For years he wrote commentaries, long, dry reports of conquest, but in their dryness, was strategy. He gained territory and loyalty. The Senate grew uneasy. Pompey, once his friend, became less so. When ordered to return to Rome without his army, Caesar paused, then crossed the Rubicon, a small river, a big decision. He marched on Rome, and Rome let him. There was no epic battle, just footsteps and surrender. Caesar took power, named himself dictator again. Not for 6 months. He wore the purple, sat on ivory, reformed the calendar. Yes, the one we still use. But he spoke too often of kingship, too warmly of crowns. And in the Senate, among pillars and shadows, knives were drawn. On the Ides of March they came. Dozens of senators, men in togas, men with short blades and long fears. They stabbed, and Caesar, stunned, saw among them a friend. Brutus, then nothing. Rome fell silent. No king, no Caesar, only a question, who now? And that question would give birth to an empire. But not yet. That, dear listener, belongs to another chapter, one of heirs, of Octavians, and of emperors crowned in dusk. For now, let us rest with the Republic, still pretending it can survive. And if your eyes are heavy, so were the Republic's ambitions. Close them, drift. The empire is coming, but not in a rush. Rome never rushed. When the dust of Caesar's death settled, Rome looked around. There was no king, but there was Octavian, a young man, soft-faced, calculating behind the eyes. He was Caesar's adopted son and heir at just 19 years old. He inherited not just a name, but a problem. Rome was fractured. Pompey was gone. Crassus was dead. The Senate was nervous, and the streets were full of whispers. So Octavian did what Romans often did. He formed another alliance with Mark Antony, Caesar's former general, and Lepidus, a man whose name people often forget. They called it the Second Triumvirate. It didn't last. Antony went east, to Egypt, to Cleopatra. He drank, he loved, he dressed like a god, some said. He called himself Dionysus. He stopped writing home. Octavian, meanwhile, stayed in Rome. He built slowly, collected loyalty, spoke calmly, and began to prepare. The final war was not dramatic. It was naval. At Actium, in 31 BC, Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra. They fled. They died together, not with fireworks, but with poison and disappointment. And Octavian returned to Rome, alone, unopposed, ready, but he did not crown himself. There was no emperor yet, no golden throne, just subtle changes. He took the name Augustus, the revered one, not king, never king. He accepted titles: Princeps, first citizen; Imperator, commander; Pontifex, Maximus, chief priest, each one quiet, polite, but together they meant power, real power under Augustus. Rome found stability. The streets were paved, temples were cleaned, grain arrived from Egypt on time. The Senate still met, still argued, but less often, and with less meaning. Augustus reformed laws, encouraged marriage, punished adultery. He wasn't exciting, he wasn't loud, he was efficient, and Rome, tired of chaos, welcomed the boredom. The empire expanded, not dramatically, but steadily, into Spain, into Gaul, into parts of Germania, though not for long. At Teutoburg Forest, 3 Roman legions disappeared into trees and silence. Augustus, hearing the news, is said to have whispered, Quintilius Verus, "Give me back my legions." He did not raise his voice, he just mourned. And Rome pulled back. Augustus ruled for over 40 years. He died in 14 AD at age 75. His last words: "Have I played my part well in this comedy of life?" He had, and the curtain closed. But Rome did not pause. Another emperor rose. Tiberius, adopted, dutiful, unloved. He was not exciting. He spent most of his reign avoiding Rome, living on the island of Capri, sending letters, inspecting paperwork, punishing critics quietly. Some called him paranoid. Others called him wise. History remembers him faintly, like footprints washed by slow waves. Then came Caligula, a different kind of quiet, at first hopeful, then strange. He appointed his horse to office. He dressed as gods. He demanded applause. His reign lasted only 4 years. He was assassinated in a corridor, and Rome returned to normal. Normal meant Claudius, an uncle no one expected. He limped. He stuttered. He loved history. He added Britain to the empire, wrote books, avoided speeches. He ruled with pens and parchments, and then he too was gone. Then came Nero, and things got interesting. But even interesting, in Rome, happened slowly. He played the lyre. He raced chariots. He ignored the Senate. When Rome burned, some said he sang. Others say he wasn't even there. He blamed the Christians, built a golden palace, then was declared an enemy of the state. He fled, took a dagger, and with trembling hands ended his own story. His last words, "What an artist dies in me." Dramatic, but also ... tired. With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian line ended, and the empire kept going. Because Rome, by now, had learned it didn't need great men. It just needed time. After Nero died, Rome blinked. There was no clear heir. Just generals, legions, marching, waiting, in the span of a single year. 4 emperors came and went. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Ves, Basian. Each one, brief, like a breeze, across marble. Only Vespasian lasted. He was practical, not poetic. He taxed even urine, he said. Money doesn't stink. He used it to build the Colosseum, not for glory, but to entertain, distract, and pacify. He restored order, balanced ledgers, wore plain clothes, and then, after 10 steady years, he died. Quietly, with a joke. "I think I'm becoming a god." His son, Titus, followed. His reign saw disaster. Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii in ash and silence. Rome wept. Titus helped. He gave aid. He spoke gently, and then he died. Young Dot, his brother Domitian, took the throne. He was stern, demanding, orderly. He improved the economy, revalued currency, built temples, but he grew suspicious, watched everyone, punished critics. Eventually, the court turned on him. He was stabbed, quietly, efficiently. The Senate declared his memory, erased, damnatio memoria. But statues are stubborn, and memories linger. After chaos came calm. The Nerva-Antonine dynasty, 5 emperors in a row, none inherited by birth, all chosen. They ruled in peace, with letters and libraries. Nerva, first old, kind, short-lived. He adopted Trajan, a general, popular with the army, disciplined, quietly ambitious. Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest size. He built Trajan's Market, the world's first indoor mall, not for shopping sprees, but for grain, olives, taxes, and scrolls. He defeated Dacia, constructed columns covered in tiny stories, and when he died, Rome had never been bigger. His heir was Hadrian, thoughtful, bearded, fond of architecture and travel. He toured the empire, slowly, not with armies, but with architects. He visited cities, met governors, asked questions. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, not to conquer, but to say, "This is far enough," a soft border, a whisper to the north. He loved Greek culture, read poetry, grieved deeply for a friend Antinous who drowned. He built a city in his memory and a temple, and then moved on. Next came Antoninus, pious, a man so calm, so uneventful, that history nearly forgot him. And yet, under him, Rome was stable, safe, prosperous. He issued fair laws, respected the Senate, maintained peace. He reigned for 23 years and never led an army into war. A perfect emperor. For Naps then came his heir, Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher, writer, a man who thought deeply about everything. He wrote meditations, notes to himself, soft reminders to be kind, to be patient, to remain steady. He ruled during plague and war, but never lost his calm. He carried burdens, quietly, and when he died, he left the throne to his son. That son was Commodus, and things changed. But for a moment, Rome had 5 good emperors, 5 decades of peace, of building, of thinking. It was called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, not perfect, not eternal, but steady, enough to lull the world to sleep. In that silence, Rome paved roads, standardized weights, expanded baths, and hosted games, quiet cheers under stone arches. It was a time when boredom was beautiful. After the gentle wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, Rome expected more peace. Instead, it got Commodus. His son. His opposite. Commodus didn't like scrolls, or debates, or statues of philosophy. He liked attention. He believed himself to be Hercules. Reborn, wore lion skins, carried a club, staged fights in the Colosseum against animals, gladiators, and once, perhaps, a giraffe. He renamed Rome after himself, even renamed the months. He smiled for crowds and frowned in private. Eventually, his inner circle grew tired. He was strangled in his bath by a man named Narcissus, a wrestler. Rome paused and sighed. Next came a string of emperors, each shorter lived than the last. Pertinax lasted 3 months, assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. Why? He was too frugal. The Guard, Rome's elite protectors, then auctioned the throne, literally to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus won, with coins, not love. He was emperor for 9 weeks, and then, not. Rome turned to generals, warriors from the provinces, men with legions, not manners. One of them, Septimius Severus, took power. He brought order and sons. One of those sons was Caracalla. Caracalla ruled with intensity. He extended citizenship to all free men in the empire, not from generosity, but to collect more taxes. He built the baths of Caracalla Grand, enormous, with hot pools, cold pools, gardens, and libraries. He also killed his brother. In their mother's arms, he traveled with soldiers, rarely smiled, wore armor. At dinner in 217, he was stabbed while urinating on the roadside. An inglorious end to a heavy life. Then came Elagabalus, a teenager, a priest, a mystery. He brought his guard from the east, a black stone, placed it on a chariot, paraded it through Rome. He changed traditions, married often. Once to a Vestal virgin, he hosted strange feasts, filled rooms with rose petals, let guests suffocate. He wore silk, painted his eyes, and declared himself divine. The Senate was confused, then alarmed. Eventually, Elagabalus and his mother were killed, their bodies thrown into the Tiber. Rome resumed. Next came Severus Alexander, young, quiet, polite. He tried to restore order, lower taxes, speak to the Senate, but generals had lost patience, so had soldiers. They killed him, too. By the 3rd century, Rome no longer ruled from a throne, but from tents. The crisis of the 3rd century began. Dozens of emperors rose and fell. Some lasted years, some weeks. The empire split, then reunited, then split again. Coins lost value. Borders blurred. Invaders came, not in storms, but in steady trickles. Rome was tired, and yet it continued, because Rome was not a man, not a senate, not a single city. It was a habit, a rhythm, a memory that refused to stop repeating. In these strange decades, temples still stood, aqueducts still flowed, census takers still took notes, and people still slept under Roman roofs, even when emperors wore costumes, even when chaos visited. The empire endured, not out of strength, but inertia, and that, perhaps, was its most Roman trait. By the mid-3rd century, Rome had changed, not suddenly, not with a bang, but slowly, like a statue weathered by rain. New emperors came from new places. Illyria, Thrace, Syria. Some couldn't speak Latin fluently. Some never saw Rome, and yet they wore the purple. They issued coins, led legions, held titles, but the cracks had deepened. Taxes rose, trade slowed, roads crumbled, barbarians, Franks, Goths, Vandals pressed at the edges, not with siege, towers, but with hunger, with movement, with cold farmers left fields. Cities shrank, walls grew taller, and still, Rome carried on because it didn't know how to stop. In the late 200s, one emperor tried to fix things. Diocletan, firm, organized, not fond of cities. He divided the empire, east and west, 2 emperors, 2 capitals, 2 sets of problems. He created the tetrarchy for rulers. One system, it worked. For a while, then came Constantine, a soldier, a strategist, a visionary. He marched under a Christian symbol, the Chiro, and claimed victory. He legalized Christianity, built churches, and founded a new city, Constantinople, far from Rome, far from senators, closer to the rising sun. Rome, the city, became symbolic, once the heart of empire, now a monument. Tourists walked its streets. Emperors sent messages from elsewhere. Temples grew quiet. Columns stood, cracked but proud. The West decayed, slowly, economically, emotionally. The Senate still met, but spoke less. The army relied more on mercenaries. Germans served in legions. Germans commanded them, and finally, in 476 AD, a date children memorize, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed, not by fire, not by blood, just removed. No one panicked, no bells rang. The Eastern Empire Byzantium carried on for another 1,000 years, but the West, it faded, not in rage, but in resignation. Rome had ruled for centuries, but it did not collapse. It receded like a tide, leaving ruins and legends and roads that still led to a city that no longer ruled. And so, the most boring empire that ruled half the world had finally gone to sleep. And now, here we are, not in a palace, not in a forum, but somewhere between sleep and memory. We've walked through 2,000 years, from a Chevalf's cave to marble corridors, from whispered laws to emperors who thought themselves gods. We've seen kings who built walls, and senators who built nothing at all. We've met emperors who wrote poetry, others who wrestled giraffes. We've watched cities rise and roads stretch across continents, and we've seen Rome not fall, but soften, melt into language, into ruins, into calendars and cathedrals, into you. Because Rome never really ended, it became quiet, And in that silence, it became history. If you're still listening, perhaps you're not. Perhaps you're drifting through Roman streets, stone beneath your feet, fountains gurgling in the dark. Perhaps you're watching torchlight flicker on marble, or listening to distant voices in the Senate, arguing about grain. Or maybe you're just asleep, deep, calm, and unbothered, like a statue forgotten in a garden tonight. You've traveled far. Without moving, you've learned and let go. That's what Rome does. It teaches and it fades. So rest now, close the gates, fold the maps. Let the empire grow quiet again. You've earned your peace, as Rome once did. Snoozy history, sleep through the past, one empire at a time.